If you're someone who is grieving, you've probably heard of the word grief brain. If you haven't heard of it, I highly recommend Googling it and researching it, because as someone who is grieving, it's a bit of a relief to find out you're not crazy and grief has actually changed your brain. Whether it helps or not, we can show this data to others, especially when they're, questioning why we have brain fog, questioning why we don't remember things or whatever. It's helpful to show the data. And it's kind of bizarre, but it's a relief to see images of MRIs of brains of someone whose loved one died. And it makes sense because for me, especially, trying to do this work and trying to make videos, sometimes I feel like I can't put an entire sentence together. And what's wrong with me? So knowing what I'm working with, knowing that it's my brain, my brain has been traumatized. That makes so much sense. Of course my brain has been traumatized. Your brain should be traumatized if your child dies. It makes sense. So I spent some time with a friend recently who is going to be starting a podcast soon. And as soon as she does, I will share the link for that. About 6 months before my daughter died, her husband died. And we have spent a lot of time talking about grief and about our situation and about how others treat us. And she is actually changing her career path to become a counselor. So it's been fascinating to talk to her about these things as she is going through her training. So here is a little snip of a conversation we had recently where we talked a little bit about the changes in your brain when you're grieving. Right. Okay. So something that I think, that I guess it's not common. Well, a lot of things aren't common knowledge, but it's not common knowledge, I think, that your brain literally changes.
Yes. It's not just an emotional, figurative thing. It's literally the structure of your brain changes from grief. And it's not just depression. Sometimes it's PTSD or trauma-based response, but there are regions in your brain which actually shrink. The hypothalamus, the amygdala, and sometimes parts of the prefrontal cortex, which is back here behind your forehead, and the others are kind of more towards the back. But yes, those regions actually can shrink in size from all these different things going on, and that causes personality changes as well as emotionality, lots of different things, but it is literal changes in your body as a grief response.
How much of that is permanent, and can you grow it back? Yeah, because I'm feeling kind of like I'm feeling kind of attacked right now because that feels very personal. I feel so stupid. I feel so like brain fog and stupid. Like I used to be a very intelligent person, not like bragging, but I used to be smart.
You're still smart.
And I feel like now it's everything is so much harder. It's such a struggle. So I get it. I understand why that trauma would cause my brain to just explode or implode.
You do get it back to a certain extent. The process is called neuroplasticity, where over time your brain is to a certain extent able to regenerate itself. Just like, if you say cut your hand, over time those skin cells are going to heal and regrow, and if it's not a deep cut, you won't see it later. If it was, there's going to be a scar. Same thing with your brain. If it's, I don't want to say superficial, because any changes to the brain are not superficial, but the less traumatic it is, of course, the less amount of shrinkage, if that makes sense.
That makes sense to me, yeah.
So if you face a very traumatic thing like we both did, finding the person, then of course you're going to have a huge change in your brain. And it, like I said, it will over time heal to a certain extent. But then there's changes. I mean, obviously, depression is the biggest challenge that people face with grief. But even over time, as you are healing and are less depressed, there are other changes that occur in your brain that can cause symptoms like anxiety and OCD, ADD, ADHD, basically anything that you had a predisposition for before the event is going to be intensified after. So, like, say if you tended to have depressive tendencies before, of course, that's going to be huge afterwards, because, I mean, everybody's somewhat depressed after their loved one dies. But or like if you had just a little bit of ADD every now and then before, then you're gonna be like maybe pinging all over the place later, even at a point where you think you're healed, because your brain is just going through all these massive changes.
How, like, at any point after, like you mentioned, like after the event, like at any point it can pop up, like say even years later.
Yes.
Like you think that you're fine, and then all of a sudden, something changes.
We all learn coping mechanisms along the way, and some of them are unhealthy. And eventually, if you are not using those particular things anymore, or if you haven't dealt with some area that you think you have, then something is going to pop back up later that might send you into a tailspin, and then you're gonna have more symptoms than you did prior.
So like if you get out of the habit of whatever healing activities you're using, and then also if another trauma happens, like you said, like if something you haven't fully dealt with, that is gonna basically just open it up for you again. What was that? Can you explain that one again? Where's that in?
And then you take the salt and the lemon and pour it in there, stir it around.
Yeah.
Well, and it's hard because life continues. I mean, it does not slow down. And I remember the first month or two afterwards thinking that was the most unfair thing, that life just continues. You don't ever get a break, and you're still expected to perform at the same level that you did before with no break, and everybody else just acts like everything's fine and dandy, and you're like, I'm dying here, nobody cares.
I think that's like the biggest thing when someone has such a traumatic loss that we experience, that you cannot possibly explain to someone. They can't fathom what you're talking about when you say you feel like you're standing still and the world is spinning around you. And how can you be, like looking at others, how can you be celebrating a birthday or celebrating the holidays or laughing at a joke or going to the movies or all of the things that just keep going as though this person never existed?
Right.
Like, you're like, how are you not sad? Or how are you not, I don't even thinking of how the fact that you're telling me about your big birthday plans are hurting my feelings, and then I feel guilty because it's hurting my feelings. And then it's just a vicious cycle. It would be nice if it were easier to explain to people that, like you said, it's not just an emotional response, and it's not just for a period of time, but it's physical changes in your brain. It's lifelong, and it's something that we have to cope with for the rest of our life. So everything is different.
Yes, your whole reality is different. I mean, like we were talking about earlier before we started recording about how we were both kind of, people pleasers before, and then, you hit a certain tendency after grief to just get, I don't care anymore. And you might find yourself going from being this very sensitive person to feeling like you're more just shut off, and like you don't even realize till sometime later on that you are functioning over here on this side, and you're like, I'm nothing like the sweet little happy bubbly person I used to be. Like, how did I get over here? But I think that's also at the point where, healing is occurring and you can see kind of how to start steering yourself back in that direction, because you're aware that you're doing it, that you've gone to the dark side.
that makes sense, because instead of feeling like, what's wrong with me, I feel numb, I feel dead inside, recognizing that that's actually part of your brain's survival mechanism in helping you put the pieces together to not, I don't want to say like make friends with grief, but to start to
basically.
but to weave it into your life, because it's not something that goes away. Like, that grief, it doesn't have to define you, but it is a huge part of who you are.
Well, it's like it's a passenger in your car, and you can't ever kick it out on the side of the road as much as you want to, but you don't have to let it be right up on you while you're driving. You can make it sit in the back seat, or even throw it in the trunk and tie it up with ropes around it,
That makes me think of, I read an article, and the only thing I really remember, because memory is difficult, this woman, she referred to grief as a wolf, and she said something about like the wolf lives in the basement, but it was because she had tried to push the grief down and keep it in the basement, but the wolf would not be ignored. And if you didn't give the wolf attention when it wanted it, it would get worse and worse, to the point where it's like biting you in the face, because it will not be ignored. And she basically went through something to the effect of making friends with the wolf and recognizing that the wolf is actually a companion. And if you are gentle with the wolf and you're paying it enough attention, that it's your companion through dealing with whatever you're dealing with. That it's not there to chew you up and spit you out, but it's actually like it has to be dealt with. You can ignore it.
But
you
it's
can
gonna
ignore it, but you're
come
gonna
back up.
right. But you're never going to get to a place of any sort of healing.
Right.
If you continue to, stuff it down. The article did a much better job than I just did of explaining
that was really great. That was a great metaphor. I liked it. I
have to try to find the article again.
I was thinking of many things while you were saying that.
Yeah.
Like, one was, it reminded me of the thing with the two wolves, like the one that you feed the most. And also, I was still thinking about grief as a passenger in the back seat, and how you're saying like shoving the wolf into the basement would kind of be like putting the ropes around it and throw it in the trunk. Not the best place, because when it breaks out of those ropes, it's going to come at you with a gun. It's going to be worse. Yeah. So probably keeping it in the back seat and watching it in the rear view mirror and actually speaking to it is the best strategy.
Right, like paying attention to what it's asking you for. Sort of maybe like what is it when you're trying to like, it's negotiate.
Yeah.
Like to negotiate with it, to say like, what can I give you right now to sort of appease you? Because there's times when we can spend more time working on our healing and paying attention to grief, and there are times when we do need it to be in the back seat, because we have to function, because like you said, being a mom and having a job and all of the responsibilities, there are times where you have to just say, I can't think about this right now. I have a job to do.
You did. Yeah. But I was saying too, there are positive changes that can occur too. I mean, as well as the negative, and that's kind of the way that I've learned to have to look at it. Like, I'm a much stronger person than I used to be. Not that I would have ever chosen to have gone about it this way, but you have to find that inner strength that you never knew you had to be able to just keep existing. And, eventually you look back and you can see how much you have grown, especially if you say, okay, at this month, let's say in December of last year, what was I doing? And thinking about the state of mind you're in, especially if you have any types of writings that you can look back at, and you really can see how far you progress along the way. And that's also helpful. But also, once you start focusing on other people and trying to think about how you can help somebody else, then that is a huge part of your healing too, to be able to say, well, this worked for me, or what can I do to help you? When you focus on other people, it keeps you from drowning in your own stuff so much.
I hope that was helpful. If grief brain is something you've never heard of before, I hope that it is helping you recognize that you're not crazy, that there are physiological changes that explain why you don't remember anything or why you lose your keys, and also gives us something to show others what's going on. Let me know in the comments below your thoughts and your experiences with grief brain, if this was new to you or if this is something that you were already familiar with, how it has helped you to explain to others what's going on with your brain and how it's affecting your daily life as you are a person living with grief. I hope this was helpful. Check out some of my other videos on other grief topics and subscribe and hit that bell notification so that YouTube will let you know the next time I make a video, and let me know what else you want me to talk about in future videos. Until next time, bye y'all.